Well, Susan Ley, the Deputy Opposition Leader, has written a piece in The Australian today where she says that Australia is now becoming the hungry country, not the lucky country. This is off the back of Food Bank Australia's 2023 Hunger Report, which reveals 3.7 million households are going hungry. For 3/4 of these households, it's the first year they've ever experienced food insecurity. And this all ahead of another rate rise, which is very much on the cards for tomorrow, Melbourne Cup Day. Let's bring in now our Monday panel, Sky News contributor Joe Hildebrand here in Sydney. Great to see you, Joe.
Sharri. Lovely to be here.
And Director of Headline Advisory, Andrew Carswell in Canberra. Hey, Andrew.
Hey, Sharri.
Andrew, let's start with you. Look, how much do you think this serious cost of living crisis, where so many households are really struggling to afford just basic items, struggling to be able to pay the bills, feed their children, afford school clothing? I mean, this is even before they have to try and pay for Christmas. And then we've got another rate rise on the cards tomorrow. Do you think this is behind the fall in the Prime Minister's approval ratings today in Newspoll?
Well, certainly, Sharri, the struggle is real, but it's whether the struggle is being realised and felt and understood at a government level is the problem here. I mean, the public are seeing a Prime Minister that is obsessed with things that don't matter to them. That he's talking about things that don't really connect with where they're at. And so there is this growing disconnect between ordinary Australians and where their Prime Minister is at. And they're currently seeing the Prime Minister overseas. And it is great that our Prime Minister travels and does all these things overseas and meets with the people he needs to meet, particularly on trade, which is an important issue. But it doesn't help the ordinary person sitting at home watching on the TV as the Prime Minister shakes the hand of another foreign leader. It doesn't help them. So there is that growing disconnect, and we're starting to see that come through in the polling, and particularly the polling on the weekend that suggested that even in traditional Labor seats, working class suburbs, there is a move away from Mr Albanese. And I think that's only going to get more and more. The more that the Prime Minister fails to address those concerns and have empathy with where people are at, because you can't really do much to address cost of living. You can pick away at the sides, you can introduce little bits of policy that help along the way, but there's no big policy lever you can pull. It's about standing with people in their hour of need and showing empathy.
But the problem is, Joe, that the Prime Minister, I know you love him and you're friends with him, but he categorically, during the election campaign, stood up and told the Australian people he was going to make life easier. He was going to make life more affordable. This was his key election promise, the top one. And the point Andrew Carswell makes is a very good one, that at the moment Australians are seeing their Prime Minister on overseas trip after overseas trip after overseas, and you know, there's about 4 more overseas pit stops to come. He's going to be out of the country probably for about a month.
Yeah, look, I mean, the optics might not be fantastic, but there is no question about it. The PM had to go to America to meet with the US President. He had to go to China to meet with Xi Jinping. That is good for our national security, and that is good for our trade relations and our economy. And as the RBA tries to sort of thread the needle and manage to get us through this without a recession, our trade with China is going to be essential for that. So while it might look like he's out there globetrotting, these are actually really vital things. And Kazi, of course, has acknowledged that. I think the mood is, and the Redbridge polling, where they actually went to people, wasn't even just by electorate, but they actually went to people by qualification. So people in vocational trades, people who with just a year 12 qualification, that number has flipped against Labor, and that is incredibly disturbing. It's the sort of thing that I and others have been warning about and trying to bang the drum on for years and years. Joel Fitzgibbon is another example, and I'll be writing about it, I'll have written about it for the Telegraph tomorrow. That's an existential crisis for Labor, because if they don't represent the Labor movement, then they're going to have to change their name. So that is a big problem.
You're referring, of course, to the polling that was front page of the weekend tabloids papers.
Sunday Telegraph, I think
they were
that's right.
reporting on how Albo's battlers, if he ever had any, but his battlers have...
Well, they have. The strange thing is that spookily, they've got, the coalition now has the number that Labor had, I think it was just in August. So this is something that's happened really, really quickly just over the last couple of months.
Don't you think that's from the referendum?
No, I don't actually. I think it's the referendum obviously didn't help, but no, I don't think it's necessarily that. I think it is. I think people thought that the worst was behind them in terms of rate rises, and now the prospect that there is going to be another one and that it's still going to get worse before it gets better, I think that's certainly made me think, holy crap, I'm going backwards, I'm going to go backwards even more. And a lot of people would have thought, I'm one of the lucky ones.
Well, because the government very clearly said the inflation peak was behind us, it's coming down, and that hasn't turned out to be the case. We just saw another...
The inflation peak has, but the...
Well, the peak might have been behind us, but it just rose again last quarter. Andrew Carswell, look, you were the press secretary for Scott Morrison, so your old boss has just visited Israel, the trip that the Prime Minister should have made. He's going everywhere else in the world but can't manage to make it to Israel. There's been about 30 world leaders or senior cabinet members of various governments around the world who have gone to Israel. Can you tell us about Scott Morrison's decision to make that trip?
Well, the juxtaposition is pretty dramatic, isn't it? You've got one bloke that's sucking up to the bullies in China and one bloke standing with a friend in their hour of need. And not just standing with Israelis in Israel, standing in solidarity with the Jewish people across the world, and particularly here in Australia, where they've had to put up with horrendous acts of discrimination, where kids don't want to wear their school uniform to walk down the street for fear of being abused. Where people are being spat on and called all sorts of names. Scott Morrison was standing with those Australians as well, Jewish Australians. And look, I think it's priorities here. As I said, Anthony Albanese going to China is an important event, and the government has done an exceptional job building relationship with China. Of course, China has changed in recent years as well. They've stepped away from their kind of bullying approach that they had previously. But it's about priorities. The world is not sitting by watching and waiting to see the outcomes of a policy discussion in a Beijing palace. Their eyes are on Israel. Their eyes are on Gaza and what is happening more broadly in the Middle East. And until Scott Morrison got on a plane and stood with the Israeli people, they saw an Australia effectively sitting on the sidelines with their support for Israel becoming more conditional as the days go past.
Joe, by the way, I disagree with Andrew when he says that the government's been exceptional to restore relations with China, but I've already outlined my view earlier in the show in the editorial, so I'm not going to get back into that now. But, Joe, you are a natural and strong supporter of Israel. Surely this is a mistake that neither Albanese nor Penny Wong nor Richard Marles has bothered to go to Israel.
I think, if there was an invitation, I think, of course, they would go. I think if there is an issue, it is...
the ambassador has made clear that Australia would always be welcome. He said that publicly at the press club.
Sure. I think that it's a bit different. It's different to invite someone over for a specific official visit to say that, hey, my door's always open if ever you're in the neighbourhood. So I think the problem may be that in propping up AUKUS at Labor conference, which has now flipped from right to left for the first time in a generation, basically some sort of throwaway rhetorical lines about Palestine were put in as part of a deal to make sure that the bulk of the left supported AUKUS, basically throwing them a bone. That is the sort of thing I can imagine would look, that might have seemed relatively benign or not particularly important at the time, and then now suddenly in the context of Hamas's just unspeakable inhuman act suddenly takes on a whole new importance that it was never meant to have. And I bet the PM is wishing now that he hadn't actually made even that concession.
Really?
If that is behind, I'm purely speculating, but if that is behind Netanyahu's reluctance to actually extend a formal invitation to the PM.
I just don't think that's accurate, because I have looked into this and it has been said to me in my conversations, and the Israeli ambassador Mir Maimon said it publicly at the National Press Club, that Australia would be welcome. Any leader from Australia would be welcome to visit. Well, Australia hasn't chosen to visit. They haven't wanted to visit.
Certainly, if there is an invitation to visit and they have not done that, or they've poured cold water on it, then that is a terrible mistake.
I don't think Israel extended an invitation to every single place that's visited. They've just made it known that anyone would be welcome, and he said that publicly. This is This is the decision of Albanese not to go. And you've got to say that it comes down to the fact that over his entire parliamentary career, dating from 22 years ago until 2018, his most recent public comments, he's been a pro-Palestinian activist at heart. He's expressed anti-Israel views.
And this has been a problem with the left of the Labor Party for many, many years, and you're absolutely right. But Albanese has shown that the person he was when he was a factional warlord is very different to the person he is as Prime Minister. I was speaking to someone about this who's very sceptical, someone from the right of the party who was extremely sceptical about Albanese. And even he has sort of conceded that, you know, he's actually coming to these issues in a really serious way, almost for the first time as Prime Minister. And his instincts and his rhetoric and his actions have all been far, far, far more centrist and sensible than some of the stuff he would have said in the past. But yes, I am certainly pro-Israel. There has to be a two-state solution. There is only one side of this debate that wants to wipe out the other, and that is Hamas. And I think that, you know, the problem with this conflict and this debate is everyone seems to pick their own starting point. So everyone sort of says, oh, well, no, we were here, but the Jews just came back and they colonised us. Well, you know, if you go back a bit further, the opposite is true. And you can go back again and again and again. You have to take the situation where it is now.
Jews were never colonisers. Jews are indigenous to
If you go back to the Book of Exodus, I'm pretty sure that's right, that they were actually in Israel
one should always go back to the
very long time ago.